Hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby. This meme has been used to describe brutal mismatches in ability, ranging from anime power scaling, to gaming, to looks maxing. And in the UFC, we have seen matchups that can be summarized with this meme. There was Islam Makhachev versus Renato Moicano, Quillan Salkeld versus Anshul Jubli, and most recently, Iwo Baraneski versus Austin Lane, where Iwo, a guy with a 100% first round finish rate, brutally slipped Austin, a guy with 6 KO losses throughout his pro career, within less than 30 seconds of the fight starting. And we often see these kinds of matchups when the UFC is deliberately trying to promote a fighter, with examples like Sean O'Malley versus Chris Moutinho, Bo Nickel versus Val Woodburn, and literally every single fight Ateba Gutierrez has had so far in the UFC coming to mind. However, what are the most brutal mismatches that could hypothetically be made in the UFC right now? And what outcomes would these mismatches end in? Well, I'll be going through all of those in today's video, as we examine which mismatches would result in the most devastating outcomes for each loser today. And as for the matchups, I'm going to be making 2 per weight division, with one matchup being between ranked contenders, and the other being between unranked fighters. And also, there will be no rematches included on this list. And I'm doing it this way because, well, I want to, and it's also just because it's more interesting that way because I will be able to discuss the ramifications of each matchup in greater detail. But anyways, that's enough with the intro, so let's get straight into the content. So starting with Flyweight, I have Manel Kape versus Steve Erceg. Now, you might immediately think that this isn't exactly that huge of a mismatch, and you'd be correct. But it is nevertheless the biggest mismatch I could make out of all the current ranked flyweights, unless we're talking about rematches, of course. The number one reason why Manel Kape versus Steve Erceg is the biggest mismatch you could make in the flyweight rankings is the difference in striking power and speed. Manel Kape is not only one of the few flyweights who has genuine KO power in both hands, but is also one of the fastest. On the other hand, while Steve Erceg gave Pantoja the toughest fight of his title reign, Steve hasn't looked great since. He got slipped badly against Kai Kara France, outstruck convincingly by Brandon Moreno, and most recently scraped by in a 29-28 decision against Ode Osborne, a fight where he got wobbled badly in the first round and just barely scraped by using his wrestling. While Erceg might try to scrape a win by craftily mixing in takedowns, I think Manel will simply be way too fast and deadly for him on the feet. If this fight were to be booked, I'd expect to go similarly to Manel Kape versus Brandon Royval, where Manel closes the distance against the much longer Erceg and finishes him with a series of power punches within the pocket. However, as far as mismatches go, this one isn't too ridiculous, at least not compared to the other matches on this list, which is why I'm giving Steve Erceg about a 20% chance to win, which is also going to be the highest chance to win for any matchup in this video today. But now, moving on to a real hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby matchup, let's talk about a fight that might end in the first ever fatality in the octagon. Ramazan Temirov versus Matt Schnell. Now, for anybody who has seen my last video ranking the worst chins in the UFC, we would all know that there is a solid case for saying that Matt Schnell has not only the worst chin in the UFC currently, but the worst chin in the history of the entire promotion. This guy Matt Schnell was getting slimed out cold at flyweight by relatively pillow-fisted guys like Mateus Nicolau and Steve Erceg. And on the other hand, Ramazan Temirov is 19-2 overall, with 11 of those 19 wins coming by the way of first-round KO at flyweight. Temirov is probably the second most powerful puncher in the division behind Manel Kape, and he was on a 5-fight first-round KO win streak in RIZIN and the UFC up until he faced and beat Charles Johnson, who took him to a decision. And now, after that Charles Johnson fight, Temirov ended up getting suspended for a year for his use of trimethazine, a drug that is used to treat heart conditions that can also be used as a PED that increases ATP production and reduces lactic acid buildup in the muscles. So yeah, Temirov is absolutely on the sauce, with each one of those winging hooks being powered by super soldier serum, which makes a matchup between him and Matt Schnell that much more intriguing from a scientific standpoint. I would expect this fight to end not just within the first round, but the first minute of the first round. Temirov is faster, stronger, younger, and of course hits harder than Matt Schnell, who is 38 years old and has his chin made out of wet cardboard. If Tamarov even touches Schnell with a jab, he will knock him out cold, which is why I'm giving Tamarov a 99% chance of winning this fight by KO, with Schnell's only chance of winning being some sort of miraculous Hail Mary comeback submission from bottom like he did in the Sumerdurji fight, but even then, Tamarov can probably defend submissions much better than Sumerdurji since he's a little ball of muscle as opposed to a lanklet. Now moving on up to Bantamweight, let's talk about a fight that would be a generational hate watch for me, which is Petr Yan versus Raul Rosas Jr. Now, I have made it no secret that I love Petr Yan and despise Raul Rosas Jr., a lay and pray hug merchant fighter who the UFC just desperately tries to push because he's a Mexican Gen Z kid who can bring in the TikTok audience with his meaningless "chew-wee-wee's" catchphrase. And while the idea of watching Petr Yan stuffing all of Raul Rosas' takedowns, elbowing his forearms to break his body lock, and then beating him to a pulp on the feet over the course of 5 rounds just sounds fantastic to me. Petr Yan already showed that he can put a beating on Merab, who is superior to Raul in every aspect of MMA, including striking, wrestling, and cardio. So getting to watch Petr Yan take apart Raul Rosas would be absolutely phenomenal to watch. And look, Raul Rosas Jr. obviously doesn't have the skill or the fighting will to stand with Yan, so yeah, Raul might be able to stink it up early on, but it wouldn't take long before Yan just starts tearing him apart on the feet. I'd expect Petr Yan to TKO Raul Rosas Jr. with volume, probably hurting him to the body multiple times. In this matchup, the Russian Tsar Bomba will show the coughing Mexican Zoomer baby what real mixed martial arts is over the course of 5 5-minute rounds. And I would only give Raul Rosas Jr. a 2% chance of beating Petr Yan. And now next, the unranked matchup at Bantamweight that I would classify as the biggest mismatch you could make in the division is Elijah Smith versus Cameron Saaiman. Now, those are two names that might not ring a bell, but once I explain the context, I'm sure you'll agree. Elijah Smith is currently 3-0 in the UFC with 2 finishes, including a brutal power slam KO against my fellow countryman Toshiomi Kazama, and in his most recent performance, submitted Su Yong Yu, who is a pretty alright unranked bantamweight. And on the other hand, Cameron Saaiman is on a 3-fight losing streak, including 2 brutal KO losses at the hands of Peyton Tabit and Malcolm Wellmaker. And while the competition that Cameron Saaiman has faced is definitely better than Elijah Smith, I think Smith is physically stronger and has enough finishing potential to make easy work of Saaiman. Still, this isn't as big of a mismatch as the rest of the fights on this video, so I'll say that Cameron Saaiman would have around a 15% chance to win this one. And for those of you who are wondering why Chris Moutinho isn't here, well, it's because he got cut from the UFC after his loss to Christian Quinones, and this video is about currently signed fighters. Moving on up to 145, the biggest and most brutal mismatch I can think of at this division is John Silva versus Brian Ortega. Now, Brian Ortega has been watched for basically half a decade now, having just gotten outstruck at range for 5 rounds by Aljamain Sterling of all people in his last fight after missing weight so badly that the fight had to happen at 155 pounds. This then led to Ortega trying to move up to 155 to rematch Renato Moicano, but he pulled out of that fight due to an injury, so I'll treat Brian Ortega as a featherweight since he's still somehow ranked in that division. Now, I picked John Silva as the hydrogen bomb here because he not only is one of the most powerful strikers in the division, but he's also incredibly creative with how he inflicts damage onto his opponents. In his fight against Melsik Bagdasaryan, after dropping Melsik with a left hook to right straight combination, John Silva followed up with 12-6 elbows to the body. And in his short notice fight at lightweight against Drew Dober, John Silva mauled Drew Dober's face with spinning elbows because he had broken both of his fists in the first round. John Silva isn't just a power puncher like Kevin Vallejos. John Silva is uniquely creative and violent, and it is truly fascinating to imagine what he could potentially do to Brian Ortega. As we all know, Brian Ortega has never been KO'd out cold in a fight before, but John Silva could be the one to do just that. And even if Silva doesn't flatline him, we can probably expect another generational Brian Ortega beating like the Max Holloway and Volkanovski fights. In his current state, I would only give Brian Ortega a 5% chance of winning against John Silva, with that 5% chance being if John Silva slips on a banana peel in the octagon and magically falls into a guillotine or triangle choke. Then, for the unranked mismatch, I would say that it's Jose Delgado versus Con Offley. Now, Jose Delgado didn't look too good in his fight against Andre Fili, but the guy is still incredibly dangerous. Jose Delgado is 3-1 in the UFC, with that one L being an arguable robbery loss to Nathaniel Wood, a fighter who has been one of the best unranked featherweights for quite a while now. And besides his one recent decision win over Andre Fili, Jose Delgado has finished every win, including a knee straight up the middle to flatline KO Haider Emil, who was previously undefeated. And in contrast, Con Offley got slept out cold by Myron Santos on the finals of The Ultimate Fighter, and is coming off of a blatant robbery decision against Yiza, where he got knocked down, outstruck, and outgrappled. And look, Con Offley couldn't even win the modern Ultimate Fighter, which is basically where all the guys who couldn't make it through Contender Series go. And his only legit win in the UFC was over the washed-up corpse of Ricardo Ramos, who got cut immediately afterwards. I would expect this fight to end very quickly, almost exactly how Jose Delgado versus Haider Emil went, with Delgado brutally chinning Con Offley with a knee straight up the middle. And I would personally give Con a 10% chance or lower of winning this matchup. Now, moving on to a featherweight bout outside of the UFC that is actually also the most one-sided matchup in this entire video, let's talk about Rajabali Shaydalayev versus Yuta Kubo 2 and RIZIN. Now, I know that I said no rematches at the beginning of this video, but I wanted to make a special exception for this matchup because of how ridiculous it is. So this fight, which is for the RIZIN featherweight title that is actually taking place in April, is a rematch of a fight from 16 months ago. Rajabali Shaydalayev is 18-0, undefeated with a 100% finish rate, and has never seen the third round in his career. On the other hand, Yuta Kubo is 5-2, with one of those losses being the one against Shaydalayev, where he got TKO'd. So, record-wise, there's already a huge mismatch. Although, in Kubo's case, there's the fact that he was also a former K1 kickboxing champion, so that does explain his lack of MMA experience. And well, leading up to their first fight, where Shaydalayev won by second round TKO, guess how big of a favorite Shaydalayev was? Not minus 500, not even minus 1,000. No, Rajabali Shaydalayev was a minus 2,000 favorite over Yuta Kubo, and he proved that by ragdolling Yuta and beating him so badly that he looked like a totally different person at the end of the fight. And guess how Yuta Kubo earned this rematch against Shaydalayev? It's because he's the only guy who has survived until the second round recently. In fact, Kubo has only had one fight since his previous loss to Shaydalayev, and that fight ended in a no contest. So this is basically a direct rematch for Kubo, and he's going to get absolutely murdered once again. Like, this isn't even hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby. This is like supernova versus blind baby duckling. Yuta Kubo has a 0.00001% chance of winning this fight, and that fraction of a percentage is only by disqualification. Now moving on to the UFC lightweight division, the biggest mismatch you could make to devastating consequences is Ilia Topuria versus Beneil Dariush. And well, this is pretty obvious. One of the pound-for-pound hardest hitters in the entire UFC meets one of the most fragile chins in the sport. And while there might have been a path to victory for Benny if Topuria was a pure striker or something like that, but Ilia also just happens to be one of the best damn grapplers in the division as well, having reversed Charles Oliveira's takedown and put him in a crucifix, all before knocking him out on the feet, a performance that has aged incredibly well considering Charles' performances over Mateusz Gamrot and Max Holloway. And as I said in my video about chins, Dariush's chin used to be pretty okay, but it's really declined in the past few years, and his striking looks like he's swimming through glue when you compare it to Ilia's speed. So yeah, there's like a 0.1% chance that Beneil even makes it to a decision in this matchup, let alone wins. Ilia will probably knock Benny out in the first 3 minutes of the fight starting, and hopefully he would do it with a body shot or something like that, because I'd feel really bad if old Grandpa Dariush got another concussion. And then, for the unranked lightweight mismatch, I've actually got two matchups, or rather, two terrible fighters who'd both lose in devastating fashion to the same guy. And the matchups are Manuel Souza versus Shamrock, or Manuel Souza versus Anshul Jubilee. Now, for those of you who don't know, Manuel Souza is the guy who KO'd Mauricio Ruffi on the regional scene. And Souza recently made his UFC debut, where he slept Balaji Oki badly. And while Souza isn't too special of a prospect, the guy is 14-1 with 9 KOs, and can hit very hard. And that's bad news for both Shamrock and Anshul Jabli. Shamike Rock, which is his actual legal name, who could also be a potential Quillen Salkeld victim since Shem is part Nigerian and Bahrainian, has some of the worst boxing technique to have ever disgraced the UFC octagon. He got pieced up and wobbled badly multiple times by Nurullah Aliyev, who is mainly a lay-and prey wrestler, and he also got boxed up by Abdul Karim El Sawadi, who Shem had a massive height and reach advantage over. And of course, I don't have to say anything about Anshul Jabli at this point. He got destroyed by Quillen Salkeld, and he got barked at and beaten down by Mike Breeden. Both Shem Maroc and Anshul Jabli would get meme KO'd by Manuel Souza in the first round, which is something that I actually really want to see. And if I don't get to see Shamrock or Anshul lose in a very funny way again, I'd like to see these two face each other to determine the actual worst lightweight in the UFC, because both of these men stink. And if you've ever seen Shamrock's Twitter, you would know that Shamrock has talked a lot of shit about Anshul. So there's definitely some bad blood going into this incredibly low-level matchup. And between you and me, if Shamrock versus Anshul Jabli were to actually happen, I would unironically pick Anshul Jabli to win. And next, we've got the welterweight matchups. And for this, I can't think of a more brutal beating happening than the potential matchup of Michael Morales versus Colby Covington. Michael Morales, in addition to being in contention for the ZMF, or Zestiest Motherfucker belt, also happens to be a one-punch KO artist. As Gilbert Burns recently said, he felt like throwing up after getting KO'd by Michael, and the symptoms of the concussion that he got in that fight persisted for literal weeks after the bout. And in Michael Morales' case, he's already destroyed Sean Brady, who is basically Colby Covington but better in every conceivable aspect except durability. And honestly, in this fight, I can see Colby's durability coming back to bite him in the ass, since Morales would just get that much more time to brutalize him. Colby is old and washed, and he knows that he's old and washed. I mean, he's so old and washed that he ducked Bo Nickel, a fight that would have taken place on the White House card. And Colby himself has said that he's slowing down, so just imagine what Michael Morales would do to him with his thick, girthy, powerful fists. There's no way Colby would consent to it. I'd imagine this fight would end in the second or third round, where Michael would drop Colby badly in the first and then bloody him up, maybe break a facial bone or two, and then slump Colby out Looney Tunes style the round after. I would give Covington a 3% chance of winning this fight, and that's only if it's a 5-rounder. Then, the biggest mismatch that can be held outside of the rankings is Yaroslav Amosov versus Nico Price. Now, Yaroslav Amosov is one of the best submission grapplers in the UFC, as he showed when he passed the Neo Magny test with a quick first-round submission. And Nico Price, on the other hand, he is old, he is washed, he has a terrible chin, and he wouldn't be able to do anything about Yaroslav Amosov's grappling offense. This wouldn't be a violent KO, but rather a quick and clean first-round submission from Amosov, kind of like putting down an old dog. And I think Price would have maybe a 0.1% chance of winning this fight. He's just old and washed, and Yaroslav is a bit of a monster. And next, we have middleweight, and here I'm putting Khamzat Chimaev versus Bruno Ferreira. And now, Khamzat Chimaev is basically going to be a hydrogen bomb against almost everybody he fights outside of the top 3, but I picked Bruno Ferreira for a particular reason, and that is how Ferreira got taken down and submitted by Abus Magomedov in round 3. Abus Magomedov, a Dagestani who was a literal meme for a while after he gassed out and got TKO'd in the second round against Sean Strickland, and then took part in the Ultimate Fatigue Championship against Michel Pereira to see who could get more tired faster. If you're getting taken down and subbed in the third round by Abus, who is gassed, there is just no way you're surviving against Khamzat Chimaev in the first round. Bruno Ferreira will get taken down and beaten to a pulp or have his neck squeezed off with a choke. And really, there isn't much else to say about this matchup besides the fact that Bruno has like maybe a 0.5% chance of winning by random fluke KO. So, moving on to the unranked squash match, I have Antonio Trocoli versus literally everybody else in the division. I genuinely believe that Antonio Trocoli may be in contention for being one of the worst fighters ever signed to the UFC, a fact that is made even more humiliating by the fact that his win on Contender Series was overturned to a no contest since he tested positive for nandrolone, which is a steroid that bodybuilders use. And like, imagine looking like this and being 6'5" on top of that and being so awful at fighting. He's 0-4 in the UFC, with 3 of those losses coming by finish, including 2 losses in a row where he got standing guillotine choked despite being 6'5". Like, your opponent shouldn't even be able to get a hold of your head at that height, but yet you're still somehow getting gillied while standing. Antonio Trocoli is such a bad fighter that I would pick many lightweights to beat him. And I mean, he's lost to Tresean Gore, a guy who is 5-4 overall in his pro career now. I know actual part-time fighters who have a better record than that. Like actual part-timers who do fighting as a hobby. And Trocoli is out here losing to guys like that. He is genuinely one of the most shameful signings the UFC has ever had. And the fact that he has lasted as long as he has is a bad look for the promotion. But yeah, Trocoli is so bad that literally anybody else in the division would be a hydrogen bomb next to him. Next up at light heavyweight, we have Jiri Prochazka versus Johnny Walker. And now this would be a very goofy fight for as long as it lasts, and I'm sure it won't last long. Out of Jiri's 32 wins, he has only had 1 decision, and he has 28 KOs. He also has a chin that requires Alex Pereira's power to crack. Otherwise, Jiri will just eat shots and keep on coming forward. Johnny Walker, on the other hand, has a terrible chin and cannot brace correctly for strikes. Jiri is also way faster than Johnny, and has much better striking technique than Johnny and much better coordination. And well, that's why this is such a big mismatch. Sure, Alex Pereira would also KO Johnny, but Alex is going up to heavyweight now, and there's still a chance, however slim, that we actually do end up seeing Jiri versus Walker. And if that fight were to happen, it's just anybody's guess as to which limb Jiri would use to KO Johnny. Will he spinning elbow him? Knee him? Just throw a 1-2 down the middle? In any case, Jiri will put Johnny out and put him out badly. And I'd give Johnny a 5% chance of fluking a win over Jiri, but nothing higher than that. And next, for unranked light heavyweight, I would say that Abdul Yakhaev absolutely destroys both Umar Sy and Ibo Aslan. And the reason why is pretty simple. Abdul Yakhaev is undefeated and he looks like he can grapple, while Umar Sy and Ibo Aslan both got submitted in humiliating fashion in the first round by Ion Cutelaba. Now, I might be wrong about this since we haven't seen much of Abdul Yakhaev in the UFC yet, but unranked light heavyweight is so bad that it's difficult to come up with matchups that are incredibly one-sided down there. And next, we have heavyweight. And you know what I was going to put here. It's Tom Aspinall versus Tai Oink Oink Tuivasa. And I mean, it's just a meme at this point. Tai Tuivasa is on a 6-fight losing streak, including 4 losses by finish. He's not just bad, he's regressed significantly from where he was back in the early 2020s. And I mean, as we saw in the Talison Teixeira fight, Tai Tuivasa has the first observed instance of negative takedown defense in the UFC, where instead of sprawling backwards, Tai basically just shoved his hips into Talison's face as if to say, hey, here you go, bro, just take me down. And then you have Tom Aspinall, who did get a lot of undeserved hate for his no contest against Cyril Gane, but looks like he's over his injury and is back to training. And with Tom, he's just incredibly fast and would likely take down Tai Tuivasa in the first minute and sub him. Alternatively, Tom could KO Tai on the feet, which is totally possible too since Tom is also the faster and more technical striker. There's just no way that Tai wins this fight. Sure, there's a puncher's chance, but it's only 2% or 3% at the very highest. And to be frank, I could see Tom winning this fight while being blind in both eyes. And then, as for unranked heavyweight fights, I would say that Josh Hockett versus any unranked heavyweight not named Mario Pinto, Brando Pericic, or Steven Asplund is a huge mismatch. And that's for a single reason. Josh Hockett can actually wrestle. And at heavyweight, that's more than enough to crush any unranked opposition there is. But anyways, that's the entire video. This is a bit of a slop-ish video, but hey, I hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, and subscribe. Goodbye.